Hey everybody. So in previous video, we spoke about the different elements of the project planning point of view, and let's understand if we can tackle any use cases that we can consider in real time for different stages, right? Let's start with the planning, right? How to map out a project, right? Obviously, when you think of about a project planning, you immediately tend to some people, depending on the experience that you've had, uh, different valid thought process that you have, it is always very natural to have a tendency to immediately start jump to scheduling, implementing, whatever that takes. But what is important that is if you don't get to the point of having a clear fundamental planning, what the problem solving skills that needs to be considered and understanding the stakeholder mapping, who will be involved at what stage, what will be done. This is like a fundamental thing that you need to understand. First of all, understanding the real problem to solve. It's not about, question is not about jumping to implement a project without having to understand what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve, what is the minimal MVP requirements that you need to consider, what are some of the edge cases that you need to evaluate, right? So take time to pinpoint what issue the project is actually supposed to fix. It's not always obvious, straightforward to understand the real problem that you're trying to solve, right? So, for example, like I said in my previous video, let's say, your CEO or your senior director, in your company has asked you, I'm just taking an IT company example here, as an IT manager to develop a new database and the data entry system point of view. So now you may be really very eager to jump into the project to tackle problems you've solved or struggled with firsthand based on the previous experience, right? But will that solve company's problem, right? In order to increase companies or the project's chances of success, you must look beyond the symptoms you have observed, right? We can't get the data out fast enough. You need to have different reports just to compile and update on clients' recent activity also. So what I'm trying to say is before designing the database, you should ask what type of a data is required, what will you do with it, what will it be done with it, how soon a fix is needed if anything goes wrong, right? And you need to have the risk analysis done before having to implement things, waste time, money by creating a solution that is too simplistic or too complicated or too late, right? And the one that is really not needed for what really users care for. So let's understand step by step, right? Um, so let me see if I'm able to share. So first thing I said is, right. Right, now it works. Sorry. There's always a glitch. Okay. So first we spoke about identifying the real problem. Agree? Second thing you have to identify is the stakeholders. Okay. You have to identify your real stakeholders. Which functions or people might be affected by the project activities or outcomes, or who will contribute. When it comes to who will contribute, you have to consider people, space, time, tools, money, right? And who will use and benefit from the project's output, right? So have them sign off on what they expect at the end of the project and what they are willing to contribute to it. And if the stakeholders change midstream, you should be prepared not only to respond to the new players, but also to include all others in any kind of a decision to redirect the project, current state point of view, right? Whether you're managing a project in a corporation or in an independent consultant point of view, it's very critical to have the support of the people you're working for, right? So that is very much important. Next is the project objectives, right? So it's always depending on different stakeholders, various expectations. Where it might be very challenging to plan task, right? In terms of having very coherent, manageable set of goals point of view. So the project's success end of the day will be measured by how well you meet those goals, right? Uh, the more explicitly you state them at the outset, right, the less disagreement you will have with all the stakeholders involved in terms of meeting that expectation. So make sure you follow. Why do I keep getting into this? Make sure you follow through your specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, time-limited goals. Right? For example, I'll give you a one simple objective point of view. What can be your SMART objective? Right? So recommend some kind of action-oriented at the June. If you look at that, recommend something at the June board of directors meeting. The three, again, dash the three specific things that offer the best, broadest coverage at a cost that is at least 10% realistically, right? 10% less than the company's current per employee contribution, right? So another example could be survey at least 6 providers that meet the department's minimum threshold criteria for service quality, right? So what I'm trying to understand is in any kind of objective preparation, make sure you consider quality, you consider your organization, you consider communication, right? So you identify your quality standards and determine how to measure and satisfy them. And within your organization, make sure you calibrate your goals depending on the people and resources you have available. Communication, determine what kind of information each stakeholder needs and how to deliver it, right? So as we described, apart from this, you need to be able to, in terms of a project objective also, once you get to it, you will get to the stage of determine scoping, right? Determining your scope, your resources, right? And major task, right? So here you can leverage something called work breakdown structure, right? To create this WBS, you should ask what will have to be done in order to accomplish a task or the goal X. Okay, excuse me. The goal X. And continue to ask this question until you have clarity to break down this goal X with the intermediary steps. Estimate how long it will take to complete these tasks and how much they will cost in terms of either it is your dollars, whatever it is, and person us, right? The number of steps involved. Then again, it boils down to your dollars, right? And the person us. You need to follow the hierarchy structure, right? So generally, WBS typically consists of, let's say, like 3 to 6 levels of subdivided activities. The more complex the project is, the more levels you'll end up having. As a general rule, you should not have more than like, let's say, maximum 10 or 20, unless even if it is an enormous project, if it is really needed to have it as a single umbrella, you need to think through it, right? And don't worry about the sequences of activities while you're planning for WBS. That is going, especially in the build-up phase. This approach is about having to understand if you can have a framework that will give you a better sense of staff, right? Budget, right? And time constraints, right? Time constraints. And you should be able to be prepared for trade-offs with the different values. End of the day, you're looking for quality, which is with the equation tied up to time plus cost, right? You have to make sure changing any of these variables, it is going to impact quality consistently. Any of these variables having to change at the middle of the project will have an impact, and you need to make sure there's a good amount of communication done with respect to quality and deliverable point of view, right? If your time frame for developing a new database management system, like I mentioned, is suddenly cutting off, for instance, then maybe you are in need to employ either twice the number of people in order to be satisfied with the system, right? That isn't as robust as originally planned. That's because you have not considered the capacity planning as needed, the availability planning, the velocity of different resources, both from cost perspective view and both from people perspective view. You have not done your due diligence. The bells and whistles get in the way of mission critical activities, remember? Right? So the key to establish a level of quality that meets your stakeholders' needs. This is really, um, you really need to make sure you spend good amount of time to get to the equation of having quality equals cost plus time. Okay? Because the consequences will be really high. Now, let's understand something else, right? So now when I meant to say the work breakdown structure, like I mentioned, any kind of a project, you need to have the clarity, right? Let's understand stages, stage by stage. Now, maybe the overall project, like I mentioned, will, let's consider the use case that you're given a project to migrate 3 web servers or the databases to a new physical data center, right? And the project requires the 5 new servers be provisioned in, like, I'm saying 5 servers to be provisioned in new infrastructure, right? New infrastructure, right? So what does it mean? That means previously you had three web, sorry, previously you had, oh my God, 3 web servers, right? And maybe plus additional databases. This is the original state point of view, right? So now what it takes to have the new environment transition. You need to be make sure the new servers will be built to the same old specification. Number one, specifications, specs, right? As the old ones. And once implemented, the new equipment will be have to be tested, and you have to make sure there is no degrade in functionality point of view, right? So finally, only then the third step, you have to make sure the old equipments are decommissioned. So if you think about it, there's a different stages that you need to consider, right? So what does it mean now? What does it mean? So the level one, there should be different level one, right? The major task first here is to obtain equipment, right? Obtain equipment. So you have to purchase your 3 web servers and 2 databases, ship the equipment to your new data center point of view, right? And once you have, make sure your stock is aligned with whatever purchase that you have, taken care in terms of ordering that service, alert the data center that equipment is slated for arrival, then, right, the duration that it takes, whether it's a 7 days, then next, once you have obtained the equipment, Second stage, what is that? Again, this is all before you have started implementing something, right? You're planning the initial things point of view. You have to provision, right? Provision, implement equipment in terms of configuration, everything, right? And physically, you have to install the hardware, or you load your operating system, you load your applications, everything has to be, you have to, again, this is a high level planning that you have to consider what all might be involved, right? And mirror the content that you had in old server to the new service. Then what else can be done, right? Next level task. Yeah, all of your equipment in data center, making sure the physical network connectivity is established, right? Um, Base level operating system, like we already mentioned, for web and database services is set up. You have to make sure you load your application level software, including your any, like for example, web server software, configuration point of view, any dependencies point of view, database applications. So basically, you have to copy configuration from production side, transfer it to a new service that loads appropriately. So now, next stage again of the major task is testing the mission, right? So you have to make sure you test your equipment. So here, production configuration, right? And then testing. So again, this is a high level. You are breaking down again underneath, right? In the testing, you have to ensure your network connectivity, as well as the functionality of web and database are set properly within the span of certain duration. So again, each phase you have to understand how many days it might take, right? So the next major task again will be is go live, right? Go live with the new equipment. That means you're cut out a new production site. You have to make sure your data and content integrity checks are done, right? And switching web and data access to new sites means have to make sure you run a series of predetermined tests to ensure the data is really accurate here, right? And you have to make sure any updates that needs to be mirrored or have you need to plan that schedule also as necessary. Again, go live. So again, with the predetermined tests. So again, I am just trying to break down on a high level. Pretty sure you'll have vast more tasks to cover. And right, predetermined tests, right? And again, you have to run any kind of a functionality or integrity checks that are needed, right? And then you have to decommission your old equipment, right? Tons of tasks that you need to make sure. You have to erase your software, deinstall anything that you have done, you have to erase your content. And again, that might take 2 or 3 days, right? So if you see that each phase, you have to see how many days it's going to take for you, depending on the stage and velocity and number of people you have. So next is the once the planning is done, next comes the build up. So you're building up. So before we get to it, maybe let's make sure you have clarity, take a pause, and then get to new segment of video. So I'll see you soon. What I'm going to explaining build up is how to get the project going, right? You bring your team together, you do the time estimations, and you get your cost estimates, schedule, you gather your resources, you get your commitments done, and you make them happen. Let's see how to make them happen.